very, very unusual. So in the mid-1970s, when we all discovered this, and I think I may have been one of the first researchers, if not the first, to go to Aurora to look. I went to Aurora. I talked to some of the people there who were now elderly, but they had been alive in 1897, so we were still able to talk to people who were there in 1897. And they were basically telling me, no, the story, it's not true, it didn't happen. A couple of years later, more researchers show up, and they say, well, yeah, Judge Proctor had 2 windmills and this, that, and the other thing, and they're talking to the same people I talked to are now saying, yes, we saw it all, which is kind of unusual. But the real downfall for the case comes in right at the turn of the century. There were 2 books that were written about the history of Wise County, Aurora being in Wise County, Texas, and neither one of them mentioned the crash. Now, there was no government pressure, there was no CIA, there was no Air Force to suppress the information. So if this event had taken place, these guys who were writing the history of Wise County, I think it was 10 years later and 12 years later, would have had this story in it, but there's no evidence of it. But the point is, researchers today have gone back there and looked for the evidence, come to separate conclusions. I believe it to be a hoax. Others say, no, it really happened. And again, I tried to present all the information in the book, but my investigation suggested it didn't happen. So, yeah, people have gone back and tried.
I was in the cemetery.
Haven't we all?
I know.
I mean, I wandered around the cemetery looking for the grave of the Martian, but didn't find him. So
yeah, I didn't find it. You know, I have to tell you, from my, well, not, you know, my belief, but I went to Bermuda on a vacation, and so, you know, kind of being in that sick, alternative kind of mind, as always, what I wanted to get all of my friends were like little triangles that said Bermuda, you know, triangle keychains. Well, duh, you know, and
absolutely,
not one. I went all over that island, and I saw one copy of the book in like this funky, weird shop that wasn't even open, or I would have gone in, about the, you know, that Bermuda Triangle book, but there was not one triangle that said Bermuda to buy as a souvenir there. And well, so I could maybe understand why when they're writing their history, they maybe would want to overlook that little fact.
No, this. We have to put our minds back into 1897 or back to 1907. There's no reason to suppress that information. It was printed in the Dallas newspaper, I think the Dallas Morning News. Just the one story. There's no follow-up stories in the newspaper, and we get to 1907, and there's no reason for them not to mention this if it had happened in those histories of Wise County. It's not there. And as I say, I talked to some of the people. There was a guy with these had really bad arthritis. His hands were all gnarled and swollen. Really, I felt sorry for the guy, but he had said no, this didn't happen. And then a couple of years later, I see the same guy on a documentary about Aurora, Texas, telling me, yeah, it did happen. So I mean, which direction do you go? The evidence suggests it didn't happen. The evidence suggests that. All the guys who've been back with metal detectors, they even dug up a well that was on Judge Proctor's property, and the only thing they found at the bottom of the well was a snake. And I thought, well, that was kind of disgusting. But I
saw that on TV.
Yes, that was on History Channel, on UFO Hunters, as a matter of fact. But they didn't find anything. They didn't find any corroborative evidence, and I think that's what we need to look at, or look for, I suppose I should say.
Any other cases with similar? I mean, I think Aurora is pretty, I think a lot of people have gone there. Some of the stuff you talked about were, okay, I mean, I'm interested in UFOs, but I'm not a UFO connoisseur, so there was a lot of material in there that I'd never heard of. But in some of the more, I'll say, obscure cases, ones that don't make you a History Channel or Discovery Channel, have they gone back and looked for evidence?
There was one in Nebraska in 1883, I believe it was, and there was any number of newspaper articles and follow-up newspaper articles. And I know Jerry Clark had gone into the area trying to find some stuff and trying to find people from that era. Of course, it was a little bit longer ago than 1897. Trying to find some information about this case in Nebraska, and was unable to do so, but found a lot of newspaper articles. There was one from 1920, and that I talk about in the book, and I think the newspaper had it right in when they said it was a meteor that exploded over the town, I believe in Texas. But others have said, well, this was a UFO crash. And so I think, we look at that stuff and we go back and look at what the newspapers of the time say, and it's pretty clear that really wasn't a crash. It was a natural phenomenon. So there's that sort of thing going on. The problem is if you get back too far, there's no real point in going to the area other than to get a feel for the terrain. You can't find witnesses because they've all passed away since then. You can't find much of anything. So
and you don't think there would maybe be like debris or places in the ground? Again, not an expert, so I'm just kind of talking out my butt here. Where the earth was scorched and had like radioactivity and like the grass never grows back there or something. I don't know.
There's nothing like that. I was going to say with the radioactivity, nobody in the 19th century would have been thinking to look for radioactivity. The Geiger counter hadn't been invented yet.
Well, no, but I'm talking about now going to these places. Has anybody tried to do that?
But there probably wouldn't be any residual radiation other than regular background radiation. Now, with Aurora, I know people have gone back there with metal detectors and looked, and they have found bits of metal, but it's almost impossible to tie them to the event of 1897. And when the metal is analyzed, it always turns out to be of terrestrial manufacture. So that there's really nothing there. I mean, with we would hope for, like in the Roswell case, that somebody had stolen a piece of the debris and you could tie that debris to the event of 1947. If you go back to 1897 or events earlier than that, it's going to be almost impossible to tie a piece of debris, especially if you find it on the ground yourself, to tie it to any kind of extraterrestrial event. So it's kind of impossible to do that sort of thing. You've got to have some kind of witness testimony that would take you to the precise spot. And even if you found something there, you don't know if it has not shown up after the event sometime in the last 150 years or whatever the time frame happens to be. So in some of the 1897 events, people have attempted to do those sorts of things. When we go back much further, it just really wouldn't work out well for us to do anything like that. We can check the archives. We can check newspapers. We can check personal diaries that might be in the historical societies. In fact, there's a picture, and I bring this up because it really relates to a meteor fall in 1853, I think it is. And somebody who'd seen it in 1853 drew a picture of exactly what it looked like. A wonderful painting of this meteor in 1853. So we have a good idea what that looked like, but we also have descriptions from people who were around in that time frame, wrote down what they had seen, so we can tie all those things together. But we really don't have anything quite like that for UFO crashes.
And I just bring that up because I can understand, like, Roswell happened, and now there's this whole government thing going on, and, something happens, the government comes in, they clean it up, boom, nothing. But in these older ones, I don't see that the government would do that, and I would think that if there was a chance that something was left, it would be in some of these older sites.